Narcissists negate you because they're in persistent fight or flight. You see, they live in a different reality. What happens for these people is that they have an all-encompassing fear state. It's a very interesting thing to note because when you talk about somebody in a heightened state of sympathetic nervous system activity, it explains why someone like my dad has persistent high blood pressure, for example. And it may explain why blood pressure might be higher in some communities like African American. Well, when you talk about a community of people that were subject to inhumane treatment for centuries, and you talk about generational trauma, well, when human beings were beaten and treated like animals and then released into the wilderness and then hunted down like animals and lynched, and, the civil rights movement, has never really been a consensus in the United States, that even today our country is equally divided and racist as it has ever been. That, cause of equality has come at a great cost, with no real social acknowledgement for the psychological implications of systematic abuse, torture, and inhumanity. It's likely that what you see is a higher prevalence of neurological issues related to this. You see, I consider narcissistic personality disorder a neurological one. And what I mean is, I believe it's brought on by the fight or flight reaction. And what happens is that the fight or flight reaction is responsible for the entire subjective experience of all human beings. All human beings. And so when you talk about, people pleasers having some narcissism, and then you talk about narcissists, well, what's true is that both experiences are equally subjective. The difference is that the narcissist has a higher level of reactivity. And because they never develop consciously outside the boundaries of fight or flight, they have limited or no experiential access to a more broader state of consciousness, that this so-called higher self is not a higher self as much as it is a relaxation of the sympathetic nervous system. You see, everybody's walking around in their own illusory jungle. We're in persistent sympathetic activity from the moment we wake up. Now, the issue with this is that all of the so-called triggers that everybody experiences constitute an invisible animal kingdom of reactions. Animals create fight or flight reactions only for external threats, like real animals. But when the human being has their very first stress reaction in life, they create an artificial jungle that are subjective assertions of themselves. Something's wrong with me. I'm not good enough. Experiential abandonment, being alone, small, helpless, powerless, confused, stupid, unloved, I don't matter, I don't belong, broken, and a myriad of others. That this is the emotional fingerprint of each individual, and without exception, it is entirely subjective, that there is no event in someone's life that actually causes these experiences except for the very first fight or flight. What people are not seeing is that the reason it looks like a trauma with someone's father would cause a woman to have trouble with men is because the manner in which she experiences this is through the same triggers. And so she will feel abandoned, not good enough, something's wrong with me, guilt, and all these feelings from the discard of a narcissist. However, that will be the same experiential dynamic that is at play when her father does something really crazy when she's younger, and that will be the connection. But you see, that visual experiential connection is relatable because all people have the same reactivity. And so we've almost made the dysfunction of adult reactivity a normal baseline of what we call sanity, but it isn't. Because if you look, there is never objectivity. There's just that we all experience it, and so we assume it's normal. But experiential abandonment in adulthood is universal. We call that heartbreak. But you see, look at it. Someone being discarded by a narcissist thinks that they're alone, helpless. What am I going to do? And it doesn't matter what age they are. And you could see that that has no grounding in reality. That's why they get hoovered. That's why anybody could be guilt tripped. You get guilt tripped because you activate a fear-based reaction. It's fight or flight. And so it contains your decision making. But you see, we're failing to recognize that this anomalous existence is causing the genesis of this ruminating voice in the head, which is really the internal architect of one's own subjective experience. That the voice in the head that creates confusion and wants to understand everything is dissociating one from just simply being observational. It is the disconnection and bifurcation from objective observation, where the brain power is so profound that you just need to look at something and you'll automatically understand it. But you see, the understanding that comes automatically would cause an abandonment trigger if you were to observe the true nature of your soulmate, a person you had to idealize, to put into an idealized future as the only escape for this repetitive, not good enough reality you live within. And so we need to believe in ourselves and believe in the future to create an illusory, subjective, experiential future as the escape hatch from the burning building of a life living in perpetual fight or flight reaction. That once a child creates the thought that there's something wrong with me to explain the physiological changes in fear that's created by the fight or flight in an unavoidable reaction to the loud sound of their parent yelling at them or someone else, this causes the cascading of every thought and trigger that becomes the invisible jungle that everybody lives within in a persistent state of surviving my own experience of being not good enough, needing to figure it out and be perfect, perfect being the universal adaptive mechanism that leads to strong, to conceal weak, that leads to nice, that leads to all other compensatory behavioral paradigms. And these reactionary emotions conceal normal emotions that can build within people, creating different presentations like the reactivity of borderline personality disorder, where being perfect caused the total idealization of dad and mom into that illusory future that would enable the child to escape childhood by having to live in a total dissociative state. Now, they have a normally formed personality, unlike the narcissist who had this trigger happen before they even had pattern recognition. And so when a child at the age of 1.5 or 2 gets into a sympathetic fight or flight, they are too immature. Their brain does not have the cognitive capacity to even engage in pattern recognition. This results in a total dysregulation of the internal emotional environment. A formless state of stress, anxiety, and fear becomes a universal trigger that they experience that we call a narcissistic injury. It causes a seemingly state of psychosis because it lacks the pattern recognition that's associated with the same reaction that is generated at a later stage of childhood development due to the inclusion of more cognitive behavioral capabilities and interpretive powers. And so the narcissist retains the impermanent emotion of young children who are in a relationship with a caregiver, causing reflective emotions that reward the mother by mirroring the emotions of the mother. This causes the mother to have more likelihood to be positive around the babies. And so this causes the need for narcissistic supply. This all-encompassing fear state that they experience causes them to live entirely reactionary, needing to negate anything objective that would cause the collapse of the future they're living into. And they have to be infallible to avoid being triggered into a narcissistic injury, which is a similar reaction mechanism, but the emotional paradigm of it is formless due to the lack of cognitions and understandings. This state merely reflects the internal emotional environment of somebody that did not have the conscious capacity to form any conclusions about what caused the fear that they've been stuck within and unable to escape.